Thank you so much for joining us afternoon. Um, my name is Beauty Bragg. I'm a program officer in the Division of Research Programs, and I'm the team lead for Summer Stipends. I've been at the NEH since January 2020. My background is in American literature, and I taught for many years at Georgia College and State University before coming to the NEH. I'm joined here today by program analyst Gwen Yates, who works closely with the Summer Stipends program. Gwen will be helping me collect and answer questions for this session. We're here today to tell you more about the program and, as I mentioned, answer any questions you have. The presentation is designed to walk you through some of the highlights of the program and the application process. I have roughly 30 minutes of remarks, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a place to open the Q&A window. We'd like for you to enter your questions there, and we'll answer as many as we can in the time that we have in this allotted. This webinar is being recorded. We'll post a link to the recording on the program page on the NEH's website as soon as we have it ready, probably within about a week. Also note, please, that closed captioning is available. You can click the captioning box on the lower right-hand screen of your corner. So this is our agenda for this afternoon. We will discuss the program goals, some key details about the program, eligibility criteria, the nomination process. We'll describe the review criteria and the contents of an application, as well as where to find more information. As I talk, feel free to type in your questions in the question and answer box. As I mentioned a moment ago, my experiences before coming to the endowment, this is a common experience for our staff here to have a background as researchers and faculty. And I mention this because I want you to know that we approach the job from that perspective. As federal employees, we of course also act as bureaucrats, but mainly we see our job as supporting public and scholarly engagement with the humanities, and we do it because we believe in the humanities and in scholarship. That means that NEH staff are happy to talk with you about your projects, either by phone or by email. We want to help you get that work out and to be your allies. We have a couple of new items in 2022 to share with you. The first the first is that we are now asking for a separate one-page work plan instead of you're having to fold it into a 3-page narrative as in the past. You can submit that as a separate, you must submit it as a separate document. And we hope that this gives more opportunity for applicants to offer details in both the narrative and the work plan. A second change for this year is an expansion of our exemptions to the nomination requirements. As many of you may know, one of the unique processes of this program is that we ask most campuses to organize a selection process at the local level and identify no more than 2 applicants from an individual institution. Prior to this year, we'd already offered non-teaching staff, community college faculty, and emeritus faculty the opportunity to apply without nomination. This year, for the first time, we're also offering exemption from nomination for faculty at campuses which have been designated as serving Asian American, Native American, or Pacific Islander communities, Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian communities, and also faculty at Native American non-tribal institutions, as well as predominantly Black institutions. I almost left out. Here we want to talk a little just briefly about the program and its goals, which include the support of outstanding and advanced humanities research in all disciplines and fields. These projects we expect to be valuable to scholars or general readers or both. The program does support projects at any stage of development, but we do find that these small grants are most often most useful at the early research stage or at the end of the writing process. So one thing you should take away, though, is, or some of the main things you should take away are the fact that this award is for 2 months. It's often taken in the summer, but awardees can choose any 2-month period during which they can give the project their full-time and continuous attention. We find most often, though, that that's summer, the summer months for many faculty. The program funds fairly traditional kinds of research. People generally are using the funds to support their research and writing. Many projects result in a book or monograph, but we also see occasionally other kinds of products as well, including ebooks, digital materials, or peer-reviewed articles. Translations and editions with critical apparatus are also fully eligible in this program. Here are a couple of examples of some recent work that was supported by Summer Stipends grants, and these are just meant to show you the variety of projects that receive grants. We want to emphasize that we welcome projects in all areas of the humanities. Speaking of the humanities, here is how the humanities is defined as laid out in our founding legislation. The Summer Stipends program, though, is not limited to those traditional humanities disciplines. We also fund projects from the social sciences and sciences, but we do expect that all applicants will be using humanities methods and addressing questions of humanities significance. So here we want to just emphasize that we accept applications from scholars in all fields as well as a wide array of institutional positions. There is broad eligibility for this program. All U.S. citizens or U.S. citizens are eligible, as well as foreign nationals who have been living in the United States for the 3 years preceding the application deadline, which this year is September 21st, 2022. The program does not require an advanced degree for eligibility, and no institutional affiliation is required. While applicants don't have to have an advanced degree to apply, we do not accept applications from those who are currently enrolled in a degree program. If a person is enrolled in a degree program and has satisfied all the requirements of the degree and is just waiting for conferral, they may be eligible. They are eligible, but they will need to include a letter from the dean of the conferring school or the appropriate department chair attesting to the status as complete but waiting conferral. So we want to talk just briefly, at least at this moment, about the nominations process. Many of you are here for that reason, I'm sure. The Summer Stipends program is unique at the NEH in requiring that tenured and tenure track faculty need to be nominated by their institution, at least in general. Each institution can nominate up to 2 people per year. We do this to encourage applications from a broad range of institutions and to encourage faculty to discuss their research with each other. Institutions, individual institutions run their own nominations process and identify one person as their nominating official. Applicants should include that person's name in their applications so that we can contact them at the appropriate time to confirm the nomination. At the end of this presentation, I'll share a few suggestions for nominating officials specifically. As I mentioned earlier, there are a fairly significant number of people who are exempt from nomination. These include non-tenure track faculty, including adjuncts, as well as lecturers and other limited term faculty, non-teaching staff, community college faculty, emeritus faculty, independent scholars, and as I mentioned previously, or the previously mentioned categories of minority serving institutions. All of people in all of those categories are exempt from nomination. We have also some fairly clear rules about the kinds of things that our program does not support. There's a full list of projects that we don't fund in this program or others on page 14 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. But you might want to note that this list does not, that the list of prohibited products includes artistic projects, advocacy and policy work, teaching materials, empirical social science projects without humanities content, and dissertations. Talk a little bit about the application requirements. So one of the major things is applicants in this program must submit their own applications, even if they are nominated by their institutions. Applicants will submit the application through a portal called grants.gov, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. What's included in the packet are several items. This is also elaborated in the Notice of Funding Opportunity on pages 7 through 15. But the most important, the most important part, all of them must be there, but the thing we'll be looking at most closely is the 3-page narrative, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. There is additionally a 1-page bibliography, which you should use to demonstrate your knowledge of the field. The evaluators are asked to, weigh that bibliography, and they will know if it's not comprehensive or appropriate. Additionally, there's a 2-page resume that will be examined in the CV. You should focus on the items that are most relevant to your current project and that demonstrate your competencies for that work. We encourage you to always add your language skills. For certain kinds of projects, you will need a 1-page appendix. Additions, translations, and database projects, in fact, require the appendix. They ask for certain kinds of examples, and projects that are focused on visual material that will be analyzing visual material may include a 1-page appendix there, an image or images, but limited to 1 page. Other kinds of projects should not include an appendix at all. Another attachment that might need to be Included is the one for doctoral students awaiting the conferral of their degree that we just talked about. So if the work is complete, if you're simply awaiting conferral, that affirmation from the dean or department chair would be attached, would be one of the attachments in the application. Another conditional attachment is if you are delinquent on some form of federal debt, we'll need you to document your repayment status. And then a couple of other things that will be asked for. Project summary, less than 1,000 characters. This is so important. It's the first thing your evaluators and we see, and we use it to help us determine who will evaluate your application. You'll also be asked to provide the names and email addresses of 2 people who will write recommendation letters for your application. Those letters should ideally come from 2 different institutions other than your own, and most importantly, I think, from people who know your project well. Missing letters don't make your project ineligible, but it is more helpful to have them. And those letters will be due by October 14th. Recommenders will get a prompt for us within around 10 days after the deadline, and then they'll have 2 weeks, up to 2 weeks, well, 2 weeks to send the letters in. And then, of course, Summer Stipends offers a fixed award amount, so there's no budget required. So let's talk about the narrative a bit more. On page 10 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, you'll find an explanation of the parts that should be included in your narrative or what should be addressed in your narrative. And those include the significance and contribution of your research, also the organization and methods of your project, your competencies, skills, and access for the project, and the final product and dissemination. We do continue to require a work plan, but as I've mentioned, we now ask for it as a separate one-page attachment. And also, I mentioned that this should make it easier to fully address the other 4 aspects in your 3-page narrative. Still, your work plan should address what you will do during the grant period and how it fits into the larger arc of your project. In general, with these components, we ask that you pay close attention to the page limits. Applications that exceed page limits will be rejected from consideration. We encourage you also to look at the examples. We know it's a challenge to get so much information into what are some relatively short page limits, but you can see many examples of successful applicants, and you can look at, examine it to see how they've made a case for their projects, examine those applications. As you're thinking about your narrative, we suggest that you keep in mind the criteria that evaluators will use when reading your application, and think about how you can make your case for your project based on those criteria. You should use them to structure your narrative and think about this strategically. The 5 review criteria are listed in the Notice of Funding under section E1 or on page 18. And I'll just go through and say at least a couple of words about each of them in the next few slides. So this is sort of the why of your project. Tell your reader what the project is about and why it's important. You should give us some explanation of what this project will contribute to your specific field, but you also need to provide that information in a way that a generalist can understand. You should try to situate your project in the broader context of humanities research and knowledge. So some of the kinds of questions you might ask yourself in making a case for your project's significance include, how will this project change the scholarship? Who needs to read this book and why? How will the work change how others understand the topic? And does the work tell us anything large, or does it go beyond the specified topic? This aspect of the criterion is really kind of asking about what. What is the shape of your project? What will you do during the grant period to realize its goals? Here you want to explain to general readers how you are positioning your scholarship in the larger field, and describe how the work actually will answer your research questions. This component, the narrative itself should be clear. Your narrative should be clear and organized. We look for a well-written, clear application because we find that it's a predictor of the quality of the planned publication. Here we're thinking about this as the how. How will your project work? What are the details of how you will be working? What will you be doing from month to month? We want you to be realistic about how much work you can get done in the 2-month period, and also to be specific. You know, if you're going to work on chapter 5, say I'm going to work on chapter 5. If you're going to a specific archive, tell us that. Also give us a sense of where you will be in the project when the award period starts, even though that might be 9 or more months out from the application date. And also any activities that will need to happen after that, you may want to include in the work plan, so we have a clear sense of where that's going. So this brings us actually to criterion 4, which is about the who. There you want to think about why you are the perfect person to do this project, and emphasize your strengths, any exceptional language abilities that the project requires, or research skills that make the project work. Evaluators will look at your CV to see your research and publication experience, and they do consider, they and we consider that people at different career stages will have different levels of experience. And our final criterion is about the likelihood of success. Here you want to convince the readers that you will be able to finish the project, and it doesn't have to be completed within the grant period, but we want to see that it's likely to be finished and that it will reach the audiences that you have identified. So often evaluators are going to be looking at your publication record and your referee letters to decide whether they have confidence in your ability to produce. A number of those, of course, overlap, and I do want to encourage people to look at the crosswalk that is included in the notice of funding that shows how the criterion and the various aspects of the application work together. And so that brings me to talking about the grants.gov portal, which is how you will submit your application. In addition to the narrative that we've just talked about, you'll also be asked to fill out a couple of other forms, several other forms, and that process is described on pages 7 through 10 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So one of those documents that you'll be asked to complete is the Form SF-24. This is the individual applicant form, and it asks for information such as your name, your phone number, your email address, and a mailing address. There's an option there. Well, it's not an option, but there's a mechanism for you to enter your congressional district, and that's important for us. It will also ask for project information, the title, as well as that 1,000 word, 1,000 character description that I mentioned earlier. Regarding the project title, we encourage you to remember that is available. If an award is received, that title will be available to the public. And so we ask that you make it a clear title that the general public will understand. That form also asks for the starting and end dates of your project. Those would be the grant award period dates, so possibly May 4th, May 1st through June 30th, or some similar like that. And then it will ask for an electronic signature. Another additional form is the NEH supplemental form, and that will ask you for items such as ask you to choose the up to 3 field projects, as well as a project director field of study. So your field of study, to designate your field of study. These are important pieces of information that we use to help us choose what evaluators should review your application. So you can think carefully about those selections as they guide us in matching your application with the appropriate reviewers. We ask also that you indicate your status as either junior or senior. Junior scholars are those, we define junior scholars as those who are 7 years or fewer beyond their terminal degree. You'll be asked to give the information for your reference letters. That includes their names, email addresses, and affiliations. It's important that you enter only one email address per referee. Otherwise, the system will not know who to email, how to request the letters. You'll also be asked, if appropriate, well, you will be asked, but if appropriate, you should give us the name of the your nominating official. So again, that's required if you are tenured or tenure track and not exempt from not in one of those exempt categories that I mentioned earlier. So then you would give us the name and email address of the person on your campus who is designated to confirm that you're nominated for this program. And then we reach out to that person in October and ask for a simple confirmation that is the click of a button in an email. You'll also be asked to include another form that you'll be asked to complete is the project performance site location form. This is a relatively new form, but it's pretty simple. We ask that you enter the location or locations where your project activity will take place during the award period. So if you're writing from your home or work office, you can put your home or work address. If you will be at doing research at an archive, you give us that address. It's pretty straightforward. Then you'll also, the last piece of or set of information that you'll be asked for are the attachments, and that is where you add your narrative, bibliography, CV, work plan, and any appendices that are required or needed. I mentioned that you would use the grants.gov portal to submit your own application as an individual applicant. Your institution cannot submit an application for you, even if you are nominated. We encourage you to register with grants.gov early if you're planning to apply. All of the applications, all federal applications have to go through this portal, and you'll need to make sure that your account is set up with an individual applicant profile. Otherwise, you will be unable to apply. About 50% or more than 50% of our applications are submitted on the last day, and sometimes the system crashes or other kinds of delays occur, the slowdown. So I recommend that you submit at least a week before the deadline to avoid any technical problems. If you realize you've made a mistake somewhere and you want to resubmit your application before the application due date, we will use your last validated online submission as the application. That's the one we'll evaluate. If you do have technical problems, you can call the grants.gov helpline. They are helpful and they are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the exception of federal holidays. The number is here on the slide, and it's also listed in our notice of funding opportunities. So I've given you, I know already, a lot of information. It can be quite a bit to sort through in such a short amount of time. But what I want to emphasize is really that we offer so many resources as you work on your application. So in particular, our website, you can find the notice of funding opportunity there. It's about 20 pages. It includes detailed instructions on how to apply. The web page contains those sample applications, sample narratives that can give you some ideas for how other people have framed their projects, framed their narratives. You can also find a list of recently funded projects there, and that will allow you to see the breadth of the kinds of projects that the program has funded. Additionally, we'll be offering another webinar later this summer on August 17th with tips for writing a good application. And as a final resource, don't forget your program officers and analysts. You can contact us at the NEH. It's easiest to reach us at stipends@neh.gov. At the end of this presentation, though, I'll give my personal, my work email address and Gwen's as well. So any of those three, and there are some phone numbers listed as well a little bit later. But we will get right back to you. We enjoy talking to applicants about their applications and answering questions. And encourage you to use us. So as I mentioned a little earlier, tenured and tenure track faculty generally need to be nominated for this program. Institutions can nominate up to 2 people, and there should be a designated officer to confirm the nominations from their faculty. Applicants need to include that person's name in the application package, and then we'll contact them in October to confirm the nomination. As I mentioned before, there's no letter required. There's just a box to click in response to an email. So we thought it seems useful sometimes to talk about some of the ways that institutions do this work. And about 75% of them, about 75% of them use a standing or ad hoc committee, although they're not limited to that option, and we don't make any requirements on our end. But people people who use the ad hoc committee, the committee structure, whether it's ad hoc or standing, tend to include previous grantees or previous panelists. And if you want, if you need that information, you can reach out to us and we'll provide it for you. Many of them use the NEH program criteria as their selection criteria. And some institutions have found very creative ways to encourage applications. Some, for instance, organize a mock review panel so people have a sense of how that works. They evaluate the sample applications from the website in those mock reviews. Other places encourage previously unsuccessful applicants to resubmit. Others have offered recognition to applicants in their annual reviews. Some institutions offer internal funding for projects that are nominated but ultimately not funded through NEH. And I'm sure that some of you have come up with other inventive encouragements. We're almost ready to take your questions at this point. While you begin to type them in, get them in, I will just address a couple of our frequently asked questions, and then we'll turn to your specific questions. But people often ask, are dissertation revisions eligible? Yes, they are, but we do need you to be able to demonstrate how the project moves beyond the original dissertation. Another frequently asked question is that of, can you apply for a collaborative project? And we say yes, kind of. This is not a collaborative program, it's an individual program. So if you were working with someone else, each collaborator would need to submit an individual application. We disallow the division of an award between multiple collaborators, and reviewers will evaluate each application on its own merits. Those individual applications should take care to explain very clearly how the work would be divided and the extent to which each collaborator's contribution depends on that of the other. If an applicant is working as part of a collaborative team, they are welcome to apply for funding only for themselves. Collaborating scholars affiliated with or sponsored by an eligible institution may want to look at our collaborative research program for other different funding options. Another frequently asked question has to do with, can you apply concurrently to other NEH programs? And yes, there are a number of programs that you can apply to concurrently, including the Public Scholars Program and the Fellowships Program. The caveat is you can only hold one grant in a given fiscal year. So the matter in which you apply, the order in which you apply matters very much. if you apply for a fellowship and then for a summer stipend and receive the fellowship, then we would withdraw your summer stipend application. If you applied for, yes, okay, I won't complicate it with all the variations. And another frequently asked question we get is about who submits the application. And again, this is you, this is the individual applicant. This is an individual program, so we cannot take applications from the institution. Okay, so I will maybe close this out if I can, and we'll take your questions.
Hi, Beauty. There's a few questions that came into the inbox. I tried to tackle the ones that I could, but the ones that need to be responded to are NEH summer stipend applications allowed to propose to use some of the awarded funds to pay for translation services to be provided by another scholar at another institution, maybe in another country for a research project?
I think usually the answer to paying other people is no. If you would hold on to that question, Gwen, or if I can ask the asker, the poser of that question to email me directly, I can verify that. But I don't think you can pay other people.
Okay. Because this is a short-term support, would it be appropriate to seek support for a first book chapter, or is it only appropriate to seek support for something like a final chapter in a project under contract?
I'm sorry. So the question was about the first chapter, a first chapter?
Yeah,
versus
is it
final
appropriate?
chapter?
Right. Is it appropriate to seek support for a first book chapter, or is it only appropriate to seek support for something like a final chapter?
Yeah, your project can be at any stage. And so yes, first chapter, final chapter are both appropriate and acceptable. I think, laying out an introductory chapter, for instance, is I think it's maybe easy to, I think overall what an applicant would want to be clear about in the narrative is to be able to demonstrate where that project fits, that chapter, in the overall arc of the project. So that would be, there's no question of inappropriateness, but maybe making the strongest case, I think might depend on having a clear sense of how that initial chapter will unfold or advance the applicant to be able to work on the next chapters.
Okay. Are longer or more ambitious projects more likely to be awarded books over articles?
We fund both books and articles. At our end, there isn't a particular preference. I think that we do fund more book projects, but it's a result of receiving more applications for book projects. But we are happy to receive applications for article, for projects where the product is an article. And I think in that case, the main advice I would offer is, for the applicant to be pretty precise about the scope of the article and their sense of the potential impact for the article for scholars.
Okay, how do we confirm we are faculty at an exempt institution?
Great question. Thank you so much. In the notice of funding opportunity, we direct you to the Department of Education website, which it puts up a matrix of that lists the institutions that have recently been certified as carrying whatever designation. So we do give you that link in the notice of funding opportunity. You could also go directly to the Department of Education website and find it. But the 2022 list is up at this point, and it's actually been reconfigured in a way that we find so helpful. So it's got sheets now with each category of institution. You can click on the appropriate sheet and confirm that your institution is carrying that designation.
Can you say more about the level of detail needed for the work plan?
Yes, well, that I can say I had thought about this in preparation today. We do want to see the detail. In summer stipends, because the period is so short, maybe you don't need such a detailed, like we don't necessarily need a daily schedule. But if your plan is 1 week at the archives, at an archive, and then 3 weeks of writing, or and then another archival visit, and then more writing, or something like that, that's a pretty reasonable plan. I mean, that I'm not evaluating the plan, the value of the plan, but that's a pretty reasonable level of detail. You probably want to let us know what you have done already for the project, and if there's anything else that will need to be completed afterward, and what the timeline is on both of those ends.
What is meant by access in this case? Competencies, skills, and access.
Sure. So access, I think it has a broad array of implications, but I think the first and main one, kind of comes out of that archival model, and they want to know, have you made contact with the appropriate archivists? Are you going to be able to access the materials needed? You might also think, if you're doing an ethnographic project, or using some other mode of interview, will you be able to talk to the people? How will you reach them? What are the connections or relationships that have already been established, or how will you establish them? I think those are the kinds of things that people typically talk about, the ways that people typically describe their access.
Is there a rubric for scoring these applications that we may look at? And 2, what is the contact information for discussing our projects with someone at NEH that can offer us insight and feedback?
Okay, great. That's a great question. I'll go ahead and move this to the slide with the contact information. And I will ask Gwen to remind me about the first part of that question.
It says, what is there a rubric scoring for these applications that we may look at?
There is no scoring rubric, but we include the criterion in the notice of funding opportunity. And evaluators we ask them to offer ratings on a scale that ranges from some merit. Well, let me start at the top first of all. Ranges from excellent to very good to good to some merit to not competitive. And we just ask them to assign an overall rating using one of those summative points. We do pay very close attention as well to their comments, and we do have a multi-level review process. So from the evaluators, it comes to, we do a collective staff assessment, and then it's assessed again at the by members of the National Council. They make recommendations to the chairman's office, chair's office, and it is the chair who makes the final decision. I hope that's not more information than you wanted, but so we don't have a rubric, but we have a multi, I mean, I guess that is a rubric I've described, but it is an iterative process as well.
Is secondary research considered an acceptable undertaking? I will have done archival research already, but need to do further reading in the field of contextualize it.
Yes, absolutely. Secondary research is acceptable. I mean, is necessary and recognized. Yes.
Here's a bit of a long question. Could you please explain how we should best prioritize the CV? I understand that the CV should be as tailored as possible to the project, but especially for junior scholars, this seems a bit more complicated to me. If we have many publications at competitive journals, it seems as though this would be important to signal, especially as it might speak to the feasibility of the project, and show that we have been productive as early career scholars. If we have many conference presentations on the topic that we are proposing for summer stipend support, how does that compare? Which should we prioritize on the CV? Normally, we are instructed to always include the publications. So is the NEH different? And what about the other awards, either in support of the project at different stages or not?
But can you reread that last part? What about the other projects?
Normally, we are instructed to always include the publication. So is the NEH any different? And what about the other awards, either in support of the project at different stages or not?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand that very last part, but I certainly can address the question. The questioner is raising some really excellent points, and I think is already sort of providing the answer there. Yes, for a junior scholar, yes, we actually do. I mean, I think it would be helpful and wise for you to include your publications, even if they're not all related to the project for which you are applying, because exactly as you said, evaluators will be able to see that you have a record of completing work. If you find that you are having, for reasons of space limitations, having to choose between conference presentations and written publications, I think, my advice would be to be really more selective about the conference presentations. That might be where you really focus on the things that are most related to this work, or that sort of demonstrate the trajectory of how you got to this work. First, you started asking these questions, and then that led you to this field. And I mean, there's no narration, but if there is a path that you can demonstrate through your selections, that could be helpful. And maybe that person can just help me understand the last part of the question. I just didn't understand. I wasn't sure what the other applications you were referring to, questioner.
Okay, I'll go to the next question. Maybe they'll
Okay,
email us more specific details about their question. I am an adjunct and staff member at an institution. I do my research on my own time. This means though I am more than 7 years out from degree, I don't have the same kind of publication record as a tenure or TT senior scholar. Do I designate myself as a senior scholar anyway?
Yes, you do. We're using a very simple definition there, but that I think you can use your CV and your narrative. I mean, you don't want to get bogged down. You don't want to get in a defensive position, but you might just include one line or a couple of lines. You just want to offer that context. Make sure it's evident to the evaluators that that you are working without the support of that your research is taking place without the support of the usual kind of institutional resources. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that, but it might be worth, a line or two to give some context. One of the things I'll go back to the criterion. One of the criterion is the quality or promise of quality of the applicant as an interpreter of the humanities. And so we do have, I mean, the reason that language of promise of quality is there is to give us some an expansive framework for thinking about the evidence in front of us, if that makes sense. The evidence in front of us in terms of publication and those kinds of things.
Can you talk about the appendices required for translation projects?
Yes, the appendices for a translation project should give us a sample, so should give us the original language sample as well as a sample translation. And also in the case of translation projects, we require that one of your letter writers speak to the quality of, well, speak to the translation.
Is the one-page work plan to be outlined?
We don't have any requirement for how what format you take. It can be narrative, it can be a schedule, it can be bullet pointed, it could be outlined if that is the best way for you to convey the information.
We are allowed to submit an application even without being nominated for tenured track. Or do we be nominated first in order to submit our application online?
So if I understood the question correctly, you need to secure the nomination from your campus so that when you do apply and we reach out to your nominating official, they will actually affirm or confirm that you are the nominee. But there's nothing that you have to submit to us in advance. The process on your campus, though, needs to take place in advance to determine who the 2 applicants will be.
Can you talk a little bit more about what constitutes humanistic methods and questions of humanistic significance? I'm asking this as a social scientist.
Sure. So we really think about this in terms of, I mean, some ways you might think about that are, I mean, we definitely don't understand strictly quantitative. We don't understand quantitative methods to be humanistic. What we typically see are either kind of case study methods or interview, ethnographic kind of methods. And I think in terms of thinking about the question, what are the humanities questions, I guess, is, you know, what are the implications for a bigger narrative, how we understand narrative, for instance. I mean, if your project is tracking, just as an example, you know, is tracking kind of teens' self-identity construction through, I don't know, their online presence or something. So, you know, I would assume, I mean, what we would expect there in terms of method is that you would actually be talking to these folks, or some other method that kind of looks at them as whole people. And then your synthesis of that into some conclusions that speak to one of these, you know, bigger, sort of more enduring questions. So what then do we know about identity? I don't know, gender. What do we know about, what new do we learn about the potential of, like, how people use language, something like that. I know that's semi-vague, but just when we talk about those kinds of humanities questions, we are thinking about the bigger, some of the bigger questions that, you know, help us understand society on a broader scale or larger order. And so I will say, one of the ways that I think a person might also think about this question is thinking about how would someone, just asking yourself the question of, is someone outside of your specific social sciences field, would they be able to use this work? Would a historian, for instance, be able to use it? Or would I mean, not that you have to reach that specific audience, but it is sort of one way of thinking about, is the framework big enough, or is the framework addressing a larger humanities audience?
The funding opportunity says NEH seeks to support projects that respond to the initiative, quote, a more perfect union, end quote. How is this weighted in the review criteria? Are applications that address this initiative more likely to get funded?
I'm sorry, Gwen, I'm going to ask you to repeat that question for me again. And also, if you're able, after I answer it, to give me a time check.
Yeah, sure. The time check is 3:08.
And okay, I think, were we scheduled to 3 p.m. or beyond?
I thought it was 3.
Okay, I was under that impression too. So and then if you'll repeat the question for me, we'll take this question and maybe one more.
Okay. The funding opportunity says NEH seeks to support projects that respond to the initiative, A More Perfect Union. How is this weighted in the review criteria? Are applications that address this initiative more likely to get funded?
That's a great question. The A More Perfect Union is a initiative. It's an agency-wide initiative. It's not part of our criterion. It's actually kind of a bonus. It's a bonus for applicants in that the awards that are selected under that program are actually above and beyond our expected and budgeted awards from the program directly. So it doesn't work for you and it doesn't work against you in either way in terms of the evaluation. It's simply that if an application is successful, then they can be identified for that imprimatur and that support.
Let's see, is there a list of schools with the AANAPISI and AANHI and other designations that are exempt from nomination? I think we answered that.
Yes, that is on that Department of Department of Education website matrix that I was mentioning, and you can link directly to it from the notice of funding opportunity. And yes, it does. It lists all of the institutions that are carrying that have been certified for 2022 with that designation.
Okay. Could you provide more clarification on how the work plan is distinct from number 3 of the narrative, feasibility of the proposed work plan? Is the work plan an expansion of the details that applicants would provide in response to number 3?
I confused myself. I apologize to the audience for that. I confused myself momentarily. The feasibility of the project is the criterion, and the work plan is pretty significant. It's a pretty significant place where evaluators will be assessing the feasibility. So I'm sorry to have confused myself and you all for a moment. Those comments were matched to each other, and I don't know why I thought they weren't for a moment. But one of the things, I guess, a final thing I would say about that is all of these, most of the criteria can be demonstrated in multiple ways in your application. So a person with a solid record of publication is also likely to be seen as likely to, to be able to complete the work that they've proposed. So sometimes even if it looks ambitious, for instance, right? I have heard evaluators say about a particular application, well, it looks kind of ambitious, but I look at their record and I see they have a really strong publication record. So I have confidence that, they know how much they can get done in this amount of time. So that's one way of thinking about the feasibility. On the other hand, like we were talking about the access piece just a moment ago. If a person is, if their project is dependent on access to an archive that, for instance, the evaluators know is difficult to access, and they see you haven't addressed it in your narrative, or, typically the narrative is where it would be, they may raise some questions or concerns about that, about the feasibility of the work plan, right? So my point is that some of these factors are overlapping factors. And so, some of it you may communicate in the work plan directly, some of it you may communicate in other spaces, other portions of the narrative. So I am going to, as I mentioned, I think we're already a little bit over time, and I didn't mean to do that. I thank you all for attending, and for your attention. If we were not able to get to your questions today, I hope you'll feel free to reach out to us at any one of these contacts that are currently up on the screen. And I wish you all a great afternoon.